Times Radio Early Breakfast.
19 minutes past 5. Well, the Times has the words of military chiefs saying Starmer is playing with fire on defence spending is their lead story. And also on the front page, Kemi Badenoch using her first meeting in the shadow cabinet to seriously criticise Rishi Sunak's election campaign amid concerns she has. Some of her colleagues have failed to grasp the magnitude of the Conservative Party's defeat. You would wonder if they're failing to grasp that where they've been when we look at that new set of MPs who arrived in Parliament yesterday, far more Labour MPs than can fit on their benches. The Daily Telegraph has a photograph of Keir Starmer with his wife Victoria preparing to get on board that flight to the States for the NATO summit. They've now touched down. Their headline is "The Prime Minister could boost the size of the armed forces." The Guardian says Starmer calls on NATO to raise defence spending. And there is a brilliant photograph of Jude Bellingham and Harry Kane in training yesterday before tonight's Euro semi-final against the Netherlands. The Mirror puts it as "Bond of brothers." Boss Southgate hails the special team spirit ahead of tonight's semi-final. Here to go through the papers with me, Andrew Eborn, the barrister and broadcaster. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie, and lovely to join you. And congratulations on your election coverage. You must be exhausted.
I think collectively maybe the United Kingdom are maybe quite exhausted of the election and quite excited that we've now got some policy to get stuck into, some new stories, a new government and sort of the anticipation of what that's all going to be like and what shape it's going to take. One big question mark, Andrew, is defence spending. The Guardian says Starmer calls on NATO to raise defence spending. How much clout do you think he will have when he ends up now today on the world stage for the first time?
Well, it is interesting, isn't it, seeing the sort of feedback about Starmer, as we all predicted, Starmer-geddon. Well, there he is now, but being a bit woolly in his own language about what he intends to spend and when he intends to spend it. I mean, this sort of 2.5% when the situation allows is really not good enough, because that's not really how defence works. But yes, certainly he's in NATO. All eyes are on NATO. But I think, as your earlier guest pointed out, all eyes are actually on Joe Biden and how well he's going to perform. So I think, in a way, the narrative's going to get lost a little bit on this. But certainly he's there with his wife, calling on NATO to increase defence spending in response to the rising global threats. And they are rising global threats, and it is extremely worrying what's going on. I think the more that we can push towards peace, rather than spending more and more money on the military side, would be good. But it's the 75th anniversary summit in Washington, and Biden managed to make his speech, which was incredible. You'll remember Liz Truss and the lettuce. Well, I've sort of started the Oval Office versus the orange yesterday, and see which might last a little bit longer.
Well, I mean, the Democrats will be relieved that 13-minute speech went off without a hitch. He sounded much more confident, but as Jim Townsend was just saying there, that's not going to do much to sort of sway that 90-minute performance we saw a couple of weeks ago. Front page of the Times, Andrew, there is this sort of wonderful contradiction in the Conservative Party right now. Kemi Badenoch is really sort of taking a swipe at the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, also her colleague Suella Braverman, who, it has to be said, has not been mincing her words the last few days. But then inside the paper, James cleverly says infighting won't make us winners. Instead, humility and hard work might. Do you think the Conservatives understand humility right now?
I think they should certainly learn pretty quickly. I love an avalanche of alliteration, so humility, absolutely. Bitter infighting and finger-pointing won't work, and he's quite right to point that out. And this is always what happens, isn't it, when there's a talk about a leader whilst he's still in power and there's no chance of becoming the new leader. You all support him and say, oh, no, I couldn't possibly stand, I couldn't possibly comment. Well, now they're all going to be fighting to try and get the top job. But James Cleverly has been quite diplomatic about the whole thing. He's saying, look, okay, whoever stands for it, he'll talk to the Times. Excellent choice. And basically they've been punished because it's too often divided, is what's happened about the Conservatives. They have to present a united front. They have to regroup. It's been one of the worst results for them, going from an 80-seat majority to these horrendous losses in an eternity. So they need to look at this. They need to build back trust. And I always say that trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback. And Starmer, in his speech to the Commons yesterday, which is a very dignified sort of way of doing things to start off the parliamentary sessions, referenced trust as well. And I think this particular election was more about a negative vote. It's the party we don't want, we're going to vote for the others, as opposed to a positive one. So I do think politicians across all the political parties need to look at trust and restore that with the electorate.
Well, that was the point that Keir Starmer was making for MPs across the House to say trust has got to be paramount. One thing that's been hugely divisive, really, just in the last few years, in this last 4 or 5, is the culture wars.
Yes.
Lisa Nandy was talking about this yesterday. The culture secretary says the era of the culture wars is over. She says, in recent years, we've found multiple ways to divide ourselves from one another. I mean, how can she sort of declare the era over?
Well, it is interesting. Yes, you can stop that now. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful wishful thinking. I do support her on this. I mean, it's absolutely right. Let's stop the culture wars. We should be celebrating our differences. And as she says, polarization, division, and isolation have been thriving. So we need to make sure that as a country we are Great Britain. Let's make Britain great again, but celebrate our diversity. So it's wonderful words, but as you rightly say, Rosie, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Let's see what happens. But it's a good start, is what I would say.
Well, exactly. We will see, and particularly the tone of conversation at Prime Minister's questions, and well, really the editorials that we read from Conservative potential candidates putting themselves forward for the leadership as well. What tone that takes in the next few weeks will be interesting to watch. Front page of the Telegraph. This headline they will be gleeful about. I think the housing minister tried to block a development in his own backyard. This is the new housing minister who tried to block a £770 million property development in his constituency. And herein lies the problem. The Labour Party and the Chancellor have been saying, look, we're going to build these developments and it's going to be a case of where, not if. But there will be NIMBYs within the Labour government who don't want them being built in their own constituencies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. IHA, I hate acronyms. NIMBYs, not in my backyard. That's exactly what they're saying. And this is this extraordinary story which came out. And I always say, look, everything that ever you've done, everything you ever said, every picture you ever taken will come out at some stage into the hands of the people you least want it to. So they should have seen that the optics on this are not going to be good. But this is what's happened. The new housing minister tried to block the £770 million property development in his own constituency. Matthew Pennycock is the Labour MP for Greenwich and Woolwich, and he wrote to his council complaining that plans by developers to build a series of high-rise apartments were wholly inappropriate and would have a detrimental impact on the local heritage. It's not looking good, is it? Apparently it was going to create 1,100 new jobs and bring an annual £42 million a year, boosting the socio-economic value to the area. And he wrote this letter to Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor, and it's just emerged, this letter. And as I say, very predictable that these things will emerge and more of these things will come out. I'm sure
they will. And I'm also sure he would make different decisions if he knew what job he was going to have a little bit later down the line. There are lots of sporting stories inside the papers today. I've enjoyed this. Journalists are going and speaking to anyone who sort of taught any of the England squad. And the Times today have been speaking to Pickford, our rather heroic in the last game goalkeeper, his PE teacher, who says Pickford always had bottle, which I think we needed him to have that to be in that role.
Yes, absolutely. He always had this come on, bring it on attitude. It's extraordinary how they dig up these people. What I also love is that, according to Fisher, his attitude was not learnt, but rather an innate audacity that he had since childhood. He was very confident. He was one of those boys who went to the front of the dinner queue. Well, there you go. That makes him a good goalkeeper. It is extraordinary. Anything for a good story, and I love it. And I have to say, this has been the most extraordinary Euros for England, hasn't it? I mean, what on earth are we doing? You know, we leave it to the last one. It's rather like the juggler who keeps dropping the balls until the very last time just to get the crowd on his side. But that Jude Bellingham goal, hey Jude, will live in forever the memory of the Euro 24.
No, that goal contributed to me losing my voice. One of many things that happened. I seriously struggled the next day on early breakfast. It was very embarrassing and very unprofessional. I'm really, really looking forward to cheering very quietly this evening because the kickoff's at 8 o'clock, which is not great for early breakfast tomorrow, but I'm so excited for the game. Final thing I want to talk about, front page of the Times. Greece is sending in drones to trap sunbed offenders. And you might first of all think, oh, maybe that's sort of people hogging sunbeds. It's actually businesses and companies charging extraordinary amounts for people to, sit on a sunbed on what is a public beach, not a privately owned one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a big problem, apparently, with these businesses. More than €350,000 in fines have been imposed just in the past week by the Finance Ministry on restaurants and entrepreneurs who are basically charging for spaces illegally and preventing free access. It is quite extraordinary. Over 5 days, they acted on more than 1,000 complaints, largely in northern Chalkidiki Peninsula around Athens and on Corfu, which is a very popular destination. And they said it's a duty of the state and a right of every person, is what they're sort of saying, to protect fair access to the beaches. So it's been a big problem there, and they're charging horrendous fees. There was one business apparently charging as much as €120 for a sunbed.
That's mad. Your minute per euro expenditure is ridiculous. I love it. It's called the towel movement, which is demanding free access to beaches, which is ridiculous. Of course, you should have that anyway when you go on holiday. It's spreading apparently to other islands, prompting the government to promise to reclaim beaches from over-commercialisation. So if you're on holiday in Greece, you should proudly put down your towel, maybe next to that €120 sunbed for the day.
We will fight them on the beaches, absolutely. We'll do that.
Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew, the barrister and broadcaster going through the papers with me.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.